On April 28, 1989, Margarethe Cammermeyer went into a meeting. The meeting was with Agent Brent Troutman from the Defense Investigative Service. It was part of her application for top secret clearance. Cammermeyer had served in the military for almost 3 decades. She was 47, a colonel, and she was also about to complete her PhD. Becoming a general was her last big career goal. She had done all the required training. Only war college remained. But to get there, she needed top secret clearance. Agent Troutman had agreed to meet her in her office. This was her turf. She felt confident. But the interview dragged on, question after question, all of them rather routine. But then came a question that made her pause. It was about so-called immoral behavior, a vague term, but in this day and age, in this context, it meant, are you homosexual? Cammermeyer could have lied. She could have said no, and then added a yes. Yes, I am heterosexual. The agent would have believed her. She was a credentialed heterosexual. She had 4 kids. She used to be married. But she didn't lie. She said, I'm a lesbian. She knew that homosexuals, by law, were forbidden from serving in the US military. So why did she do this? She had so much to lose. After a painful divorce, and after losing custody of her kids, she was now about to buy a new home. A home where her kids could stay. This is the 4th episode of the podcast 200 Norwegians. And this story is about honesty. The price of honesty and the power of honesty. And how an immigrant girl from Norway changed the US military. In the previous episodes, I told you about Cleng Pearson and the sloopers, and their voyage across the Atlantic, in the Norwegian Mayflower, Restaurasjon. This, of course, happened a long time ago, 200 years to be precise. The logical next step would be to talk about those who came after Cleng and the sloopers, the second wave of Norwegian immigrants to America. But I'm not gonna do that, not now. First of all, because I want to show that Norwegian immigration to America isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It is also ongoing. I also have to hurry up and tell some of the most recent stories, for the simple reason that the major actors in them are still alive. After coming to this realization, I started researching contemporary Norwegian Americans. At one point, I even asked ChatGPT, can you give me a list of Norwegian Americans who have changed America in recent years? Cammermeyer's name quickly came up. I had never heard of her before, but I soon learned about her military career, how she came out as a lesbian, and that a movie about her life was made in the 90s. According to Wikipedia, she even ran for Congress in 1998, but lost the main election after winning the Democratic primary. I also found out that Cammermeyer was in her 80s. Not very old, but at an age where life can start to feel fragile. She lives on Whidbey Island, just outside Seattle. So I headed to Seattle. I had contacted Cammermeyer in advance, and she had told me that getting to her house on Whidbey Island could be a bit tricky. She suggested I reach out to a local driver named Dennis. So I did that. Dennis picked me up from my Airbnb in downtown Seattle and drove me all the way to her house. On the ferry to Whidbey, I had a chance to talk with him. He had known Cammermeyer for many years. Interestingly, he had first met her on the same ferry we were riding.
I used to work on the ferries in the galley, and when I was working in the galley on the ferries, I got to know Greta because she was running for office, and I volunteered to help out with her campaign.
And why did you decide to work on her campaign?
I like what she stood for, and she was a new face on Whidbey Island at the time. That's you have all the old people. You had the people that were running for office that were all the same, and it's always the same every time. And Greta was someone new, and she came with a format that I believed in, and she was out there talking to people, meeting people. I liked her background. I hadn't been out for very long when I met Greta, and that impressed me that she was willing to use her life as an example to other people.
Cammermeyer didn't start to use her life as an example when she ran for office in 1998. At that point, she had already been a gay role model for almost a decade. After disclosing that she was a lesbian in 1989, she was discharged in 92, and she decided to fight the decision shortly after. Her fight lasted for many years, and it coincided with many important milestones. The same year as she was discharged, Bill Clinton ran for president, promising to lift the ban on gay people serving in the military. Clinton won the election, but ended up compromising on his position. Don't ask, don't tell became the new policy. This policy allowed gay people to serve in the military, but only if they kept their sexual orientation a secret. Cammermeyer won her case and was allowed back into the military due to this policy. Her story became a book, and later a movie. Millions watched this movie, and it brought more attention to gay rights in the military. In 2010, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And since 2011, gay people have been able to serve openly in the US military. Do you think the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy would have been repealed if it weren't for Greta?
I don't know if it would have been repealed. I don't even know if it would have came about if it hadn't been for Greta and her status, bringing it up to focus.
After I turned off the recorder, Dennis added, "Of course, she didn't fight that fight alone." That might be an obvious thing to say, yet important, I think. And a timely reminder, as we were on the ferry, with Whidbey Island and Cammermeyer's house in front of us, and the rest of the American continent behind us. Because no man is an island, or in this case, no woman is an island, to paraphrase John Donne. In this podcast, though, I tend to hop from island to island. I focus on people, 200 different Norwegians. Historians call this great man theory, the tendency to focus too much on individuals and overlook the structures and the wider forces at play. I understand why historians don't like great man theory. Still, I wanted to go out on Whidbey Island this morning. Because sometimes you see the continent more clearly when you stand on an island. And as I've said before in this podcast, every story can't be about everything. This is Colonel Cammermeyer's story, a Norwegian-American woman living on an island, who for many years felt a little bit like an island herself, cut off from the mainland. After about a 20 minutes long ferry trip, Dennis and I were on the other side, and Dennis gave a short introduction to the island.
Okay, it's about 60-something miles long. I'm not sure the exact. It's got probably about 70,000 people living on it. The north end, with the naval base, has the most. We're down this end, there's probably about 20,000 scattered throughout. It keeps a rural atmosphere.
So what kind of people live out here? People that want to get away from the city, or?
Most people that want to get away from the city. A lot of younger people that want to try their hand at farming.
Oh. You told me that there used to be a pretty strong Norwegian presence out here.
There was what?
Strong Norwegian presence out here.
There was, and it probably still is. I don't know much about it, but up in Kuva, there's a Nordic hall, and once a year they have a dinner there. I've met several Norwegians since I've been on the island, and I do know that that's one of the histories is there has been a strong Norwegian presence here. I don't know how they came across this island, how they got here.
But I know, after a tiny bit of research, a Norwegian named Zacharias Martin Toftesen came to Whidbey Island in 1849. According to most records, he was the first Norwegian in the state of Washington, and he became the first European settler in Oak Harbor, which now is a town on the northern part of the island. Toftesen's mother and sister joined him in 1865 after sailing around Cape Horn, and more Norwegians followed. Together, these families built farms, churches, and a Norwegian community on Whidbey Island that remains today. Is this our street?
This is her street.
In the driveway, we passed a wooden troll. Then we reached a large, elegant house with a wheelchair ramp. Saratoga view?
Yes.
Is this her house?
Her house.
Beautiful. In the middle of the ramp stood a tall Nordic woman. Hei! Hvordan går det?
Bare bra. Velkommen.
Takk for det.
Det er Grete her.
Ja, trevlig.
Ja.
Jeg så dette her, tenkte jeg, kan dette være? As you can tell, Cammermeyer greeted me back in Norwegian. And I should add here that her Norwegian is impeccable, although she hasn't lived in Norway for more than 70 years. Still, talking to her feels like stepping into a time capsule. She speaks very proper and doesn't use any modern slang.
Eldre folk nede, men det var bygget som et hus, men det ble litt for stort.
Yeah. The house she lives in with her partner, Diane Divelbus, was designed by Norwegian-American architect Nils Finne. The wood and glass home has several levels and wings and is super spacious. So spacious indeed that Cammermeyer used the space to provide elder care for nearly 15 years. And you had seniors living here for years, right?
Yes, yeah. And, you know, ailing folks.
Yeah.
And, you know, essentially most of them died here.
Oh.
So that's what happens is when you get older and you're frail.
But now they are no longer able to take in more people. Now they use the space to store and showcase Divelbus art.
This is my favorite of Diane's pieces because...
Do you have an eye for art before you met her, or did that come?
No, and I still don't have an eye for art, but I have an eye for the artist. You know, it's wonderful to have a house full of art.
Yeah.
And right now, we're getting ready for her 90th birthday.
Wow.
In June.
And my apologies. Happy birthday to you.
Oh,
you turned 83 yesterday.
Yes, I did, yes.
How is it to turn 83?
You know, you don't feel it. It's just another day in the life. But Diane had a surprise party for me last night.
Yeah.
So we had, that's where all the...
Oh, yeah. The hats are coming from. Moving around her house, Cammermeyer has a special kind of presence, almost an aura. Age has tilted her slightly forward, but she still walks like a soldier.
So this is my headquarters.
Wow.
See, the rest of the place is Diane's.
This is your cave.
This is my cave, yeah.
Inside Cammermeyer's study, there are movie posters from Serving in Silence, the movie about her life. And there are pictures of her and a number of celebrities.
Al Gore, the Obamas, um, my dog.
There are also many books in Cammermeyer's office, but I have a hard time imagining she really has any time to read them, because over the course of our conversation, Cammermeyer kept getting phone calls from people all over Whidbey Island. It was pretty obvious that she was the go-to person for all kinds of problems. She even got a call from her cousin in Norway. And, by the way, Cammermeyer never cut all ties to the old country and her family there, which also happens to be a noted family in Norway. Her dad was a doctor, and so was her paternal grandfather. Her maternal grandfather was the first rector at one of the early psychiatric hospitals in Norway, Lier. Cammermeyer's mother pursued art in her early years, but changed course and became a Red Cross nurse. Later on, she was active in the resistance movement in Nazi-occupied Norway.
I was born during the war, so I don't know from my personal memories, but more from the few things that she ever said about it. I remember we lived Camilla Collett's Way, sort of catty corner where one of the Nazi headquarters was located, and she would sort of talk about how tough she was, the blustering of, and yet how intimidated once they came and knocked on the door. So you sort of imagine what she would have felt like as a young mother trying to hold off the Nazis, and yet seeing them there with their helmets and guns and things. That
Was she as tall as you?
Yeah, she was tall for her generation, yes.
She just like towered over these German soldiers.
Oh, probably not. Probably not. And there's the vague recollections of being on the balcony, because we were on the second floor, and across the street was a little grocery store, and I could see her from the balcony, and then she told a story of having a Polish man who had escaped from one of the concentration camps in Norway, as being hidden in our apartment. And when she went across the street, he would go out on the balcony and sing Polish anthems and songs like that, which would make her sort of rush back in the house to and come upstairs to get him inside, and so I play it out in my head that she was involved in all of that, but then I know she told me on occasion when she would be taking me for a walk in the stroller, and that there would sometimes be weapons underneath me.
Oh, wow.
As we were walking along, and then she would sort of cut into an alley or some place where someone would pop out to get the guns from her. And I thought, that's sort of neat. I think I would do that type of a thing.
Did she collaborate with Shotgun Seems to Be and those guys, or?
I had the sense that she was more passive in terms of, there were people who stayed with us while they were waiting to be taken through the underground out of Norway into Sweden.
The Allies, including American soldiers, helped liberate Norway in May 1945. After the war, Norway received US economic support through the Marshall Plan. This made many Norwegians sympathetic toward the US. America became the shining city on the hill, also to Cammermeyer's family, and her dad in particular. He was a doctor in neuropathology. In 1950, he was offered a job at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in the US. 1 year later, the Cammermeyer family moved. It was a great opportunity for her father. But for Cammermeyer herself, the relocation wasn't easy.
No, I mean, you are picked up from out of the blue and don't even know where you are in relationship to the rest of the world, and dropped into another country where you don't speak the language. They've got more cars than you've ever seen in your life. Uh, you have no concept of anything, and you certainly don't have any friends. And uh, so that took a while to learn how to speak English. To I don't know if fitting in is the word, because we moved a number of times while we were getting established here in the United States. Even though my father sort of only worked in two places. One was the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in D.C., and then at the National Institutes of Health. But not realizing how expensive it was to live with a family and things, we ended up moving several times, and then finally into a duplex, and then ultimately into a house again. But it meant that I probably went, I think, to 11 schools in the years that I was growing up, which caused, a lot of, there wasn't stability, and there wasn't an opportunity to establish long-term relationships with people. I am fortunate in that I have friends that I have remained in contact with from Norway. And, even though it was sometimes 15 years between trips going back, but that those relationships, just like with family, have been nurtured and sustained over the years. So and I think also that it accounted for me always feeling different, helped, and I felt different from my peers. Now, is that because I had suspected that I was a lesbian when I was a kid? Things you didn't even know about at the time, but that nothing really fit. And so it wasn't until my first trip back to Norway, when I was, 18? So I'd been gone for nearly 10 years, where it felt as though I fit in. So that it gave me a greater understanding of why it was I didn't feel like I fit in. And that was extremely reassuring. But it took a long time to get there.
One passage in her book describes how it was to grow up as a tall Norwegian tomboy in the 1950s.
My upbringing was conservative, and expressions of warmth and affections were very rare in our family. Consequently, sexuality was somewhat of a mystery. At school, there were the days when boys wore their blue jeans hanging down so low you could see the crease between their buttocks cheeks. Except for occasionally worrying that their pants would fall off, I didn't think about feeling any attraction or non-attraction to the boys in high school. I liked boys as teammates and friends and competitors. Several guys in my neighborhood taught me to box with some thin gloves, something I thoroughly enjoy. But I dated less than others in my school, and that made me feel unattractive and unworthy. I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be like everyone else, and everyone else wanted to date. I wasn't pursued, and it wasn't appropriate for a girl to express interest first. The girls' roles back then were to be pretty, available, and passive. Even my mother would tease me about my awkwardness, strength, and height. Often, or once, when I opened the refrigerator door in a hurry, I ripped off the handle. Mother was in the kitchen and laughed, saying, "And to think I wanted a dainty little girl." It was affectionate, not critical, but common refrain for her. Some months later, my strength got the better of me again. I came home after bowling with friends. My parents had gone to bed early and forgotten I was still out and put the chain on the front door. When I came home, I unlocked the door. I felt a little resistance and just pushed a little harder. The entire door frame came off. My father rushed out in his pajamas and apologized, and my mother stood in the hall looking at the mess and laughing at her not so dainty daughter again. As I got older and more self-conscious, I decided I was too tall to be asked on dates, and the internal voice said that I was too ugly or too fat. My self-identified faults brought me the same type of uncertainty and torment every other teenager experiences also. My saving grace was my interest in sports and science. However, and here is the belated aha, I did have a crush on my junior high school gym teacher. She was the most wonderful teacher in school, athletic, fighting for our needs, pushing us to excel, yet also able to be caring and understanding. Many of us were just beginning our menstrual periods. We were painfully embarrassed and too shy to say anything, but desperately wanting for our privacy. Miss D knew without a word what our concerns were and exempted us from workouts or showers. My crush consisted only in thinking, gee, wouldn't she be fun to know outside of school?
Yeah.
And I found out later she was a lesbian.
You did?
Yes. And I had another...
How did you find out?
When my case broke.
Wow.
And the book came out, and I got a note from her. So it was curious. And the same thing happened. I had a crush on a university professor when I was in the School of Nursing, and found out that she too was a lesbian.
Despite feeling like an outsider, Cammermeyer did well in school, and she didn't lack ambition. As a doctor's daughter, she would become a doctor herself, as she writes in her book. She entered the University of Maryland in the fall of 1959 and enrolled in a demanding schedule of pre-med courses. But then, her work ethic as a student declined.
You know, I was not on top of my academic game. Had too much fun. Was drinking.
Played a lot of pool.
Shot a lot of pool. And ended up having... I went on academic probation. And then switched from pre-med to nursing. And that always felt like the pits. I remember that I had gone home to tell my mother that I wasn't going to continue in college, and she said, "Well, that's fine. You can work at the National Institutes of Health and clean beakers. Do some non-anything type of work." And that seemed rather not like something I wanted to do, so decided to go into nursing. And it, even though it felt really like a come down, it wasn't until I had met a a woman who had joined the Army Student Nurse Program and had told me about what the military had to offer, that I started pursuing that as an option and thinking that that would be something that would make nursing okay.
Mm.
And so for me, it was a real trajectory, and my schoolwork improved. I did much better in my senior year because of having sort of found a niche.
And this niche took her to many places. After becoming an army nurse and earning the rank of a lieutenant, she was stationed in Nuremberg, Germany. A slightly bizarre experience for someone born in Nazi-occupied Norway. But Cammermeyer didn't have much time to reflect on history. She was busy working at the army hospital. And outside of work, she was busy socializing. After a while, she met a man who would become her husband.
A friend of a friend of a friend introduced us, so it was sort of a blind date, because we were both tall and both available, and so we dated for a year, and then got married, and I was not sure that I wanted to, but my mother suggested that I probably should, because there might not be another opportunity. And so I did. But I remember feeling that once I said that I would, that I sort of would lose my identity. And I continued to feel that way, that who was I, during my married life. And at that time, you gave up your name and sort of assumed that you would travel wherever your husband was going to end up going. And we bought property in Washington State before we went to Vietnam, so it was clear that we were going to come back here, which was, I didn't care. So we, when my husband's name was Harvey, and when we came back from Vietnam, he was willing to stay in the military if they would send him back to Germany. And they didn't, and so he decided to get out and started graduate school, and then ultimately ended up joining the State Patrol. And I was pregnant when we came back, and so my stint in the military only lasted about an additional 6 months, because I couldn't have any dependents under 16 and stay in the military. And so I was forced out, essentially because of that. And then we sort of created a mini farm out in Maple Valley, and we're totally self-sufficient, had sort of pulled back from the world that dealing with Vietnam and everything, and didn't have a television and didn't get newspapers, and just really withdrew. And we're very busy building our estate up there. And then over the years decided that, it just, I felt out of sync in my relationship, and that I really couldn't explain it. But was suicidal. One Saturday afternoon that winter, on my way home from reserve weekend, driving as I had for the past 10 years, past the same landmarks to our dream estate, to our perfect home, I veered my car towards the telephone pole, thinking, I could hit this pole and end the pain. With a mental jolt, I jerked the car off the shoulder and back onto the road again. but I found it difficult to hold the steering wheel steady. When I finally pulled up to the house, I sat in the car and shook.
What do you think when you read this many years later?
I see it. I see the road. I see the pole. I know exactly where that took place. It's like one of those episodic memories that, once embedded, you never forget it. And it brings back all of the stuff that came afterwards.
And among all the stuff that came afterwards was a painful divorce. Cammermeyer got her name back, but she lost custody of her 4 kids. At the time, she held a rank of lieutenant colonel, and she had been promoted to assistant chief nurse. She had also started her doctoral program at the University of Washington. But this also meant that she didn't work full-time. Her ex-husband, on the other hand, had a full-time job and a stable income. He showed up to the hearing in uniform and brought 20 letters of support from friends and colleagues. Cammermeyer had not obtained any letters. She thought it wasn't necessary, and the judge ruled in her ex-husband's favor.
Yeah, the scenarios, especially early on after the divorce, the kids ended up living with him, and I had visitations. And when I would drop them off, by this time he had sort of figured out that maybe I was a lesbian, because it was not a discussion that we had. But so he would have the kids standing by the front door as I was driving away, hollering dyke, queer, lesbian, sort of these abusive words at the time that with a lot of anger. And, so I would leave crying. But it wasn't against the kids, but rather that, this was what Harvey was orchestrating. And so it was extremely painful and, recreated now as I discuss it. Because again, I see the picture and the scenarios of how it happened for years.
Have you, you certainly processed it, but have you been able to kind of come to peace with it somehow, or you still feel anger towards him? Or
I don't feel anger. I mean, I was hurt by it, but realize also his masculinity, was really undermined in some ways. Feeling that I was leaving, that ultimately, figuring out that I was a lesbian, that somehow that was his fault or something, so that it was it's his stuff, but it was very hurtful to me. But I don't recall feeling anger as much as intimidation by him. And that went on for quite a few years until the kids ended up leaving him and moving in with us over the years. And on one occasion, one of the kids had decided that they were going to leave, and so Harvey talked to me on the phone and said, why don't you just tell Andy to get his stuff together and come home and not have to fool with this anymore. And again, feeling intimidated just by his authoritarian way of speaking. And I said I would give Andy the message. And so when I talked to Andy, I said, your father wants me to tell you that you should just drive home and get your act together. And he said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'll go and south and sit on the couch or move in with somebody else. And I said, well, you don't have any need to do that. You can certainly come and live here. And so he came and moved in with me. But there was that for some reason, that particular episode where Harvey was really powerless and that the kids would be making their own decision. I delivered his message, but my job was to protect the kids. And theirs was to make a decision on what they wanted to do. And so it's in a way, I say, from that time on, he no longer had any power, even though it would have been something that I would have given him if rather than taking my own power.
Cammermeyer continued to have a successful career throughout the 1980s. She was named the Veterans Administration Nurse of the Year in 1985 for her work in neuroscience nursing. She was also promoted to colonel and appointed chief nurse of the Washington National Guard. Around that time, she also met her future wife, Diane Divilbus. In her book, Cammermeyer describes Divilbus as a great listener and someone she could open up to. Their relationship quickly deepened. By the time of the security clearance interview in 1989, Cammermeyer had already come to terms with her sexuality. She was a lesbian, and she had found her life partner.
I didn't think that in America I would have to choose between being honest and serving my country. Not in the hours with Agent Troutman in April of '89, not in the 2.5 years of investigations and hearing, not in the numerous meetings explaining my position, my record, my commendations for service, did I believe it would come down to losing my military career because of prejudice and hate. Not until my last day in uniform, the day of my discharge, did reality set in.
Yeah. What do you remember from your day of discharge?
I was discharged down in Tacoma, Washington. Lived in Des Moines, so it was about a half an hour drive. And my son asked if he should be with me. And I said, no, I needed to drive home alone. And it was devastating. It's like my attorneys knew what the results had to be because of what the policy was at the time. But I kept on believing that there would be sort of a divine intervention, and was absolutely devastated, having spent 25 years in the military and then having it all negated. And I went home and took off my uniform and hid it so that I wouldn't have to see it again. And I remember sort of flashing on the fact that when I had first joined the military, that which actually was 30 years to the day of when the hearing took place, that if you threw away or burned your uniform or something, you would be considered AWOL, absent without leave. And so you shouldn't do that, so that there was this childish memory that popped up, is that, well, even though I didn't want to see the uniform because I had just been told I was going to be discharged, that there was a part of me that was still clinging to it. in a curious way. And, you know, I get choked up just remembering that day and that experience.
Somewhere you also write that you always felt that you belonged in the military. Why was that?
Oh, you know, I think for a woman who was sort of non-traditional in some ways and naive in another, that there was something wonderful, and also being a nurse, of having it sort of as a demeaning profession at the time, that being in the military made it have meaning, that not only were you caring for the soldier who was carrying the burden of defending America, but that you were there supporting in that supportive role. And I loved it. I loved the pomp and ceremony. I loved the wearing the uniform. I loved representing America. And you know, for all the right reasons, and also feeling that I had an identity, which I think I had been struggling with and for many years.
Why was it so important for you to represent America, and why did you feel so comfortable doing that?
Well, you know, as immigrants to the United States, my parents had always felt that my father had an opportunity here in America to do a type of research that he would not have been able to do in Norway. And I'm not exactly sure of what the constraints were there, but there was something about working at the National Institutes of Health that gave him carte blanche to do his research there. And he was always extremely grateful for that opportunity. And I had incorporated that into my being in terms of the opportunities that were here, that he felt that he wouldn't have had if he had stayed in Norway.
So it was truly the land of opportunities for you.
It was, and you know, it continued to be.
But in 1992, it looked like the land of a missed opportunity. And this happened only 3 years after Colonel Cammermeyer seemingly had it all. 3 years prior, in 1989, she had found true love. She was reunited with her kids, and she was one single white lie away from achieving her career goal. Not even that, actually. It kind of seems like you could have tiptoed around that question you got in that service clearance interview, that you could have dodged it, honestly, but you kind of chose to answer it, and you kind of chose to be candid about your...
I didn't want to, you know, I felt that, you know, in my role, if I was going to apply to become a general, you know, I had to be honest and was not going to be jeopardized in the event of, you know, someone just wanting to disclose something.
Or someone blackmailing
Yes,
you?
yeah. I mean, I was just not going to be in that situation. But I also thought that because of my record, that maybe I could make a difference. And so when I disclosed to the investigator that I was a lesbian, I didn't know what actually was going to happen. And 6 weeks later, I was called in and told that they were going to start discharge proceedings against me. It took 2 years for that to happen, because my boss did not want me to be discharged. And he did everything he could to slow things down. But once the military sort of said, if you don't start discharge proceedings against her, we're coming after you. And so that's sort of where it began. And I decided that I was not going to retire, but I was going to challenge the existing policy because it made absolutely no sense. And in my previous years in the military, other policies had changed,
Right.
so that now I could get married, have kids, which couldn't have happened earlier in my career.
Do you think those things made you a little bit, like, let's say, overly naive and optimistic?
Oh, I was very naive. I mean, about all of this. I had no idea of what I was doing.
Because you did think that change was possible.
Yes, I thought change was possible, and I thought that it was my duty as an older military person to do that, because I had proven that you could serve in the military. I had had a successful career. I was just finishing my PhD, and so it really felt as though it was my responsibility. And extremely naive about all sorts of things along the way. And so when the decision was made that I was going to be charged and be discharged from the military, the last thing I wanted was not to have it publicized, because I wanted people to know what was happening in the military.
So Colonel Cammermeyer went public. She got in touch with the journalist Randy Shields, who reported on her story.
And then it hit the newspapers, and the propaganda began. And that's when Barbra Streisand heard about it. That's when Bill Clinton heard about it as he was starting his 1993 campaign, because this took place in 1992. Well, while he was campaigning, he was here in Seattle, and I was in the audience, and he introduced me when I was going to ask the question about if he would overturn the policy against gays serving in the military.
Clinton said yes to that question. He supported her and promised to end the ban on gay people in the military. And he also ran on this promise. But military leaders and Congress pushed back. So in 1993, after Clinton took office, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was created.
So the end result was the sort of compromise. You can serve, but don't let anybody know, which is an untenable situation, because you are living and working with people 24 hours a day, essentially. And over the years, I talked to people who had served in the Canadian, not the Canadian, but the Australian military, who, when they were fighting overseas, and when somebody that was a partner died over there, they couldn't go to the American clergy. Wow. They had to go to the Australian clergy to get support because of the ban against service members. And so there were just so many situations that were really horrid.
Cammermeyer's story hadn't just raised eyebrows in the political world. It had also reached Hollywood. And one day, she was at work, she got an unexpected call.
So they call from Barwood Studios and say they're calling on behalf of Barbra Streisand. Well, we're in the middle of a lawsuit, and yet they wanted to talk to me, and so I had to talk to my attorney, who said that, I couldn't go there without her. And so Mary Newcomb and I went and talked to Barbra Streisand and the NBC team and the other producers. And she felt that it was sort of the most important social issue of the decade. And there was a lot of publicity about it from around the country at the time. And because I was not interested, all I wanted to do was, do my job, get this lawsuit tended to with the military and go on with life.
And how was it for your kids at the time, to be a part of?
Well, after the story broke in the newspaper, because I thought Diane and I had been so subtle that nobody knew anything, because we'd go to all of their basketball games, and I'd be working on my PhD work and had no idea that people knew who we were. But they did. And
all of them?
Yeah. Well, I had to come out to them.
Right.
I had to tell them. And that was sort of, my attorney said I had to talk to each of the kids. And so I did that. And one of them said, he had known for years, just because they'd seen how their father's relationship had evolved and he'd gotten remarried. And for me, there was just nothing. And in terms of relationships and things, until I met Diane. And then as we became more and more known, the kids, we would go to Costco, and Diane and I would be in the front, and the kids would be in the back, watching to see if anybody, recognized us and things like that. There was a little bit of harassment at school. And when I was writing the book, one of the kids didn't want to have current pictures there because he was playing basketball, and there was enough harassment from other people there. So he was, wanting to be conservative about how much flack he had to take from the opposition. And yet, they were extremely supportive of us.
With the support of her kids, who testified in the court case against the US military, the judge ruled in her favor. The court said her rights were violated. In 1994, she was reinstated in the military, as though never discharged. She became the highest-ranking officer ever reinstated after being discharged for being openly gay. The next year, a movie was made about her life.
I'm going to sue the Army.
What?
They want to discharge me because I told them I'm a lesbian.
Do you think you could handle being chief nurse of the Washington State National Guard? Because I want you for the position.
I'm going to upgrade my security clearance to top secret.
Colonel Cammermeyer, Agent Coleman, Department of Investigative Services.
My friend Greta, my friend Diane.
Hi.
I ask, you answer very basically. Have you ever engaged in immoral conduct?
What do you mean by immoral?
The movie was a success
I have
and was
23 years of
watched by
service. That has to
millions
count.
of Americans.
The Army takes care of it.
And Cammermeyer continued her fight. She was determined to get the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy to get overturned. And in 2010, it happened. Colonel Cammermeyer was present at the signing ceremony, and she led the Pledge of Allegiance. This was no coincidence, of course. Cammermeyer's case was a game changer. Many have suggested that the repeal wouldn't have happened at all if it wasn't for Cammermeyer's effort. But does Cammermeyer herself agree with this?
I actually do. But I don't. I would give the credit to the film, to the movie, because as an individual, you may only have some notoriety in that moment in time. It's like, how many stories do we hear of people who have done something marvelous, and then there's something new in the news. But the fact that the film was made, and that it was made by Glenn Close and Judy Davis and Barbra Streisand, gave it credibility. And so it was viewed by many millions of people on television. We had premieres in New York and Seattle, in San Francisco, and in Los Angeles as fundraisers for various organizations. It was used for sort of coming out stories at home. Mom, I want you to see this film. So it gave, I think, something substantive that could be viewed when you were coming out under different circumstances, whether it be to your kids or to your parents and things like that. And I think Diane and I are just the characters, around which the story is built. But that it took all of these other players to give it credibility and credence.
So if you weren't born in 1942 in Norway, do you still think there would have been made a movie that kind of made the same impact? Do you only think that you were the right person in the right place? Or do you think that if it weren't for you, it wouldn't have happened that early?
I think I was the right person at the right place in the right time, in the right circumstance. But I couldn't give it more credit than that. It was just the circumstances, and but it's like nobody lives their life independently. It's like Edie Windsor.
No woman is an island, huh?
Exactly. Even though we live on one. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wouldn't give myself that much credit, and maybe that's why I want to keep being available, so that if people don't, and especially in this generation, they don't know what happened 30 years ago, but they do know that we're at risk. We might lose the same-sex marriage. You just don't know what's coming, and yet, we have to be visible, or else we are disappeared.
And at the age of 83, Cammermeyer still makes herself available, and she is visible. After our conversation, she drove to Seattle.
So we're going to the office of a lead legal team that is, or has just presented the case to the courts for it's the Schilling versus Trump case to the courts to see about preventing trans service members from being discharged from the service. And so we've been invited to meet with the legal team and hear a little bit about what they're doing. And Lambda Legal is the legal team that was also my legal team in the 1990s and won my case for me with the help of two other legal teams here in Seattle. And so they would like me to say a few words to open everything up, and the task now is to get there on time.
Eventually, we got to the right place, and we got there on time. And Cammermeyer gave her opening speech in front of 100 people.
So please welcome Colonel Margarethe Cammermeyer.
First of all, why do you care? Most people could care less about the military. But the thing is that the military, in addition to being the largest employer, it was now until a few days ago, that the opportunities that are there to be able to not only serve the country, but also to get a background in education and job opportunities afterwards. And not everybody, it's not for everybody. And for others, it's just a wonderful opportunity. And I can speak to that in several ways. But so that's why you care, because it makes it very obvious when there is discrimination that takes place, because it's a huge employer, and it's just plain unfair. When I was thrown out, I was invited to the Gay Pride event up here in Seattle, and it was the first time. And I would normally have worn my uniform, but I did not and could not wear my uniform at that time because I was thrown out. And so I went to a store in Seattle and found this jacket. I call it my power jacket because I can wear it, and it really speaks to something dynamic. And so I brought the picture of when I was reinstated because I have the jacket on there. And Glenn Close wore my jacket in the movie. And the fun part, in addition to that, is that when we won the lawsuit and we had the press conference, the word that I got back was, "Doesn't she have anything else to wear?" Because they had seen me at the Pride event and then at this event, and it seemed so appropriate to wear today here.
But although Colonel Cammermeyer puts on her power jacket when she has to, she is also a woman of many hats. According to the man who took me to Whidbey Island, Dennis, she wasn't first and foremost known as an activist on Whidbey Island, not even a former politician or a political candidate, but as a person that helped people. He called her a great source of knowledge.
I have a full life.
You do?
In a totally different arena having to do with aging.
Right.
My colleague and I, I'm going to switch topics a little because I am more than a lesbian.
You are.
Yeah, and each of us is. We're more than, a label. We have these full lives. And
do you feel like that was a thing when you first came out, that people thought about you as nothing but a lesbian?
Yeah. Because at the time when I came out, you said lesbian and it's sex, homosexual and it's sex, and it's the bath clubs and AIDS and everything else, because that was how we were defined, essentially, as a sexual event, object.
Right.
And the sort of the embarrassment of identifying as a homosexual that other people now knew was also very profound. Over the years, and especially as you get older, the sexual act is so insignificant that, how do you define being a lesbian? I mean, it has to do with an emotional connection. It does not have to do with a physical action.
Right.
But I mean, it's so. At any rate, over the years, Diane and I have had full lives. We've been together almost 36 years, and have sort of. There isn't anything that I think that we haven't been exposed to one way or another over the years. And she continues to work in the art community and at the county fairs, and in art and contributing in her way um, because of her background and who she is. I mean, she runs every organization that she's ever been a part of until she gives it up. Whereas, my focus, I usually do projects.
Yeah.
Long-term stuff doesn't interest me very much. But some years ago, I ended up meeting a woman who was just turning 100, a nurse specializing in gerontology. And from the University of Washington, I was at a conference there, and we met up and really connected because I had been a graduate student when she was on faculty there. And so, and then I was also there when my case broke and there was the notoriety. And so therefore, so she had, it was a gerontology conference, and she had, at age 95, started a blog called Engaging with Aging. And she was convinced to do that by the university. And I heard about it. I read her entire blog when I got home and absolutely loved it, and introduced my friends to it also. And we decided, one of them, we decided that we were going to take her blog and convert it into books.
Wow.
And because it was so meaningful in terms of how do you survive at home, living alone, how do you adapt when you have these physical and limiting events that make it so that you can't do quite as much as before, and how just how to be resilient.
Cammermeyer has obviously made herself resilient to aging in a number of ways. At the age of 75, she picked up the guitar. She has now made a number of songs on her life and on her career. In closing of the interview, I asked her to sing a song, and she chose to sing a song that she had written in Norwegian. This song is about leaving Norway behind, to something she in her book described as an open-ended nothing. But luckily, this nothing turned into something.
Det sang fødeland, og jeg var født og død. Forlot når jeg var liten, nevnte aldri hjemmets trekk. En del av meg var mistet, fant når jeg kom hjem igjen. Fant når jeg kom hjem igjen. Hvordan ble vi hvem vi ble, fra fødselsdag til nu? Barns erfaring bygget på, bli kjent med hvem du er. Daglig lev din sannhet, aldri gi opp hvem du er. Flyttet fra mitt mødreland, uten språk og venn. Etter år ble godkjent.
My name is Fredrik Kalstveit, and this episode was made in conjunction with Vesterheim Museum and with the support of Norway House Foundation out of San Francisco. The music you will soon hear in the background was made by Jan Skoglund. In the next episode, you will learn about Andrew Furuseth, the Norwegian
that brought an end to Shanghaiing on the west coast of America.